Mother Nature isn't behaving the way it used to behave for, like a couple years ago in Asheville in July, the leaves started turning yellow and falling off the trees. That's absolutely unheard of. And I would ask everybody I knew, like, isn't this weird? No, it's normal. It's I lived there 25 years. It wasn't normal. Leaves started changing at the end of September. So for young people, empower yourself.
Hmm.
Believe in yourself. The government, the powers that be, they don't want you to think for yourself. And this isn't a big ask. You're entitled to believe what you believe and what you see, not what you're being told, but what you're actually experiencing. And I think that's really, you know, critical for the young people are going to save the planet. They're the ones that are going to bring forward whatever healing that we're going to get.
And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very mad world. Mad world.
All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. I'm your host, Dean Walker, here in Southern Oregon in the USA. And I am delighted to be speaking with Allison Frank for the third in our three-part series on just what's it like to actually be face to face with one of the natural disasters or extraordinary weather events that are now so very prevalent around the world. And Allison, you've taken us through chapter one was, just a little bit of introduction of yourself and then what it was like to be living in Asheville, North Carolina. And, for a few years, and then to have that living in Asheville, North Carolina end not too long after the, excuse me, the onset of Hurricane Helene, just a couple of months ago now. And so that was the first chapter, was really took us through your experience of being in that storm and some of the context that preceded it in terms of the town and their preparedness and so on. And then the second one was you took us on your journey that started with your realization, I got to get out of here. And for a number of different reasons, through your eyes, you were able to see this town is not coming back anytime soon, and I got to get out of here. Is that fair enough recap for chapter
Yes, it
two?
is.
Okay. Well, and actually, that was just for the end of chapter one, actually. And then, so chapter two was when you left Asheville and were invited to come up and stay at a location in upstate New York, and that turned into its own kind of unfortunate and even creepy, perhaps, conditions or circumstances. And again, it called on a different part of you that you shared really clearly with us, that culminated in you having to move on again. And this time you went all the way across the country to the West Coast. to where you are now, to Southern California, up in the desert. And I've got to say, it's been good news for me to hear that you got yourself all through all the layers of challenge that both of those chapters implied, and that you got yourself to Southern California where at least you could rest a bit. You know, you could get your bearings. You could not have to worry about who's hosting you and could you trust them and on and on. You know, the things that you shared with us, just really unfortunate chapters, a couple of them. And so you've been letting us know little by little what you've ended up with after getting through layer upon layer of the exhaustion or the trauma or the stress or the creepiness and so on. Each challenge, you just kept bringing yourself through it. Now, in this third in a series of 3 conversations, we get to find out what's next. What's life got in store for you? What are you brewing on? You know, you've been very kind to speak in our offline conversations quite a bit about, you know, you've been holding what seems like a little flame of a dream of what's possible coming out of this. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share in this final episode of our conversations, if you'd be willing to share, what are you seeing out on the horizon, or what are you imagining that might not even be there yet? And by the way, hi, Merry
Hi,
Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
We are talking to one another on Christmas Day. And I am just so looking forward to hearing you lay this out, because you know, my hat is off to you for your ability to keep that flame of a vision of what's possible out ahead of you. Um, from what tiny fragment of your experience I could say that I've had in my life. In other words, being displaced, not having a home for a while, having massive challenges, one after the other. For you to keep that flame alive is really something. So I'm looking forward to this. And again, thank you for doing this series. I think it's of great value to a lot of people. So hi.
Hey, well, it's good for me to talk about it because it regulates my nervous system instead of it being just in my head.
Mhm.
And so I really appreciate you letting me tell my story, because it's a long story.
Yeah.
So it's a strange story. I moved to Asheville from Seattle, and I have been pining for 25 years to get back to the Pacific Northwest. I don't know why I didn't go. And then as I got older, I kept telling myself this story that I started believing that I was too old to drive myself across the country yet again. And I don't know why I believed that, but I did. And so the hurricane had this stupid silver lining that catapulted me into taking action, where I had to drive somewhere in order to be safe. And the first leg of the trip, when I went to New York, I was like, piece of cake, I can do this. So when I had to drive to California, I was like, I can do this too. So now the flame that you're talking about that I'm holding has been in my heart for 25 years. I've wanted to go back to the Pacific Northwest.
Mm.
And life is a very strange thing. Uh, so, so I'm going to go. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what city I'm going to. I know a lot of people in the Pacific Northwest. And California this has been really good and healing. And, I've had this cabin in the desert and I've just been resting and regrouping. But I am going to go after my dream. I mean, this is something I've wanted for years and I can taste it.
Mm.
I'm going to do this. So the the trip isn't daunting anymore. The vision isn't scary anymore. The dream is attainable, I think. I don't think this is going to be that difficult to get what I want. I mean, people are entitled to live where they want. And the Pacific Northwest to me has always been like my boyfriend. It's like that's what I'm in love with is the moss and the rain and the emerald green color and Sasquatch and being out in the woods and I have never been happier in my entire life than I was when I lived there.
Mhm.
So this will be the third time. I lived in Ashland, then I lived in Seattle, and I'm probably I don't know where I'll end up. It could be Eugene, it could be Seattle, it could I don't know, but somewhere. So I'm that's the next phase that I'm planning on. Because I don't actually think I could spend the summer in the desert.
Yeah.
I don't like sunshine that much. I'm like real happy when the sun doesn't come out because I grew up in Florida. I had enough sunshine to last 10 lifetimes. Nobody please take offense. It's not my jam. So
Right.
so that's what my goal is. And you know I don't know when. I'm going to wait till I'm healed up and I'm solid and I feel good and I'm 100% again.
Yep.
Because I wasn't. And as time rolls forward and I can look at this in hindsight, I can realize how horrible shape I was in as I was going through this crisis.
Yeah. It's great that you're bringing up exactly that because if there are two things that I would love to just wrap up this three-part series of speaking with you, I'd like to wrap it up with this ongoing sharing and focus that you brought of how you were doing, really, how you were doing in each of those chapters. So that to me has endeared you to me in a big, big way. Your ability to just be so authentic, so real, and so unguarded in terms of just sharing, look, this is how it was. And it was not easy, and I was not okay. That makes me just want to stand up and applaud when someone like yourself who's been through something serious to give those of us who have not perhaps experienced something like that some real sense of, hey, it can be tough. It can be seriously tough. This can actually take a person out, this amount of stress or trauma and so on. So I guess what I'd like to ask us to do, I'm asking you to do in this final chapter is if you would revisit just a little bit, just as they come to you, different challenges, different moments of realization of, hey, I'm not okay right now. Perhaps it's some sort of support that you needed, or some sort of internal resilience skill that you needed to bring forth, or you needed rest, or you needed medical attention, whatever it was. I think there's a real value in just revisiting a few of those challenging signposts along the way.
Okay.
And then maybe at the same time, if there were particular ways that you kept that flame alive, especially when it got challenging. Anything you'd like to say about that? Those would be my two requests. And you're sure not limited to that. That's just what I'd like to ask for, as much as you'd like to share with us.
Okay, well, I think that's a pretty easy ask because there were guideposts. Like, so the first one that was real and solid and obvious was just that morning when my friend called me and I was still in Asheville, and she said, "You have to get out of there. The water's contaminated. You have to leave." And I had to trust other people to tell me the truth because there was no information.
Mhm.
I was pretty I was pretty angry at the city of Asheville because they were withholding information. And I think that was intentional. And I think there's a story there for maybe a national reporter.
Mhm.
I can't do this. I'm not equipped. I don't have the platform for that.
Yeah.
But there's corruption in Asheville, and they hurt a lot of people because they could have knocked on doors. They could have I don't know, they could have texted people. I don't know what they could have done. But so the number one thing was that I was scared. And the most important thing was the information that I got from my friends who I trusted. I had to be 100% on board with what they were saying to me because I didn't have anything else. And again, like I said, this being alone, which I think is the sort of pinnacle of this entire journey, is the fact that I was alone through the whole thing. So I had to find something inside of me to get me forward, to move me, to like get me out of the fight or flight mentality so that I could survive.
Mhm.
And like I said, at that point, I had planned my suicide. I was like, I didn't have a plan B until my friend called. She goes, "You got to go."
Yeah.
So that was motivating, but it made me happy. I had a plan.
Mhm.
And so instead of being stuck, I had an escape valve. That's what I needed. So my inner resource, like like something kicked in. I don't know I mean, I guess it's just pure survival. But I knew I had to go, and I knew that me telling myself that I was too old to drive, I always was a good driver. I don't know where that came from. I don't know why I created that in my brain. And I reframed all the negative stuff that I had told myself for years about why I couldn't leave. And in 24 hours, I changed the entire mental landscape of what I was telling myself.
Yep.
So I had to do that. Um, because it was very clear Asheville was just devastated. It was gone. I wasn't going to stay there anyway. I didn't have anything left. So that was the first thing. And it was kind of weirdly exciting.
Mhm.
Um it I know this sounds really counterintuitive, but there was some freedom in it. And I didn't like living there anyway. And after, things are starting to get weird. The election hadn't happened, but I wanted out of a red state. And so that was a motivating factor. And as I was driving, those 4 days to New York, it was beautiful. And there was some value to that. When you're driving, you have to focus and you have to pay attention. And the only thing you have when you're driving is you either have your radio or some music or a podcast. But I didn't want noise in my head. There was already too much noise. So all I was doing, I mean, when you drive north from Asheville up into New York, it gets prettier and prettier and prettier. It's magnificent. So that was kind of feeding me. And I was enjoying it. And then I realized on some weird level that I had been cut loose and anything could happen. I mean, I had to tell myself another story. Things are going to get better.
Yeah.
Your life's going to get better. I didn't know if that was true, but I couldn't tell myself the other story, like, oh, you're going to get to New York and your life's going to fall apart, which it did. So,
Well, if I could just pause you again, as you're probably used to it by now. I've been stopping you from time to time in the first two chapters, and this time I just want to mention that, yeah, this is sort of counterintuitive that you felt freedom,
yeah.
but what I also hear you saying, and please correct me, if this isn't on track for you, I think I hear you saying that freedom is actually kind of built in to have just having no choice but to completely up and go and not know where you're going, just up and go. And that there is actually a freedom built in to that equation, but in the regular world, the world of getting back to normal after some traumatic experience, that the quicker we can get back to exactly what we were doing before, that's the ultimate target. That's the ultimate prize. In that model, it looks like not knowing where you're going is a nightmare. So that's the counterintuitive part that you're pointing at. For the average person, it's like, oh my God, my world is shattered. I have no idea where I'm going or what I'm going to do. My life is hell. So I just want to acknowledge that it's actually an option. And I'm not going to in any way try to assume that I know what makes that option available to us. I would say it's some of the inner work of collapse is the jargon we use around here, that you have enough of that inner work under your belt that it didn't take long for you as you were driving, what was it, 2 days to go down and yeah, to be able to then go north, that you had some sort of inner resilience, inner metal that you could call on to start to see, hey, this is a new possibility. This is a wide open possibility. So enough on that. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I do definitely wanted to point out that temptation to call it counterintuitive when really there is another possibility besides hell or complete disruption and so on.
Well, I think the hurricane was complete disruption. And in hindsight, because now I have the luxury of being safe and being able to process this. Everybody kept saying you're going to have to process this, and I didn't really know what they meant, but now I'm doing it.
Mhm.
So I can tell you that I think the contrast between, and I don't really think I have language to explain to you or to your listeners about the terror I was experiencing being alone during the aftermath of the hurricane. I think what you're referring to when you hear me talk about this is I think I already had been so traumatized that I really didn't think it could get worse. I think that's like I was trapped, and I don't like that feeling. And I didn't have anybody to help me. So what I was doing in essence is I wasn't going, back to like something normal. I mean, I knew it wasn't going to be my life as normal because that was gone like I'd already bottomed out. And I was looking at this like I was going to get saved. I was going to present myself with an opportunity. And I knew how, like, I'm old enough, I've traveled around enough, I've moved to enough cities. I've done this before. This wasn't my first rodeo. So I kind of know you go to a new town, you meet people, you find some place to live, you plug in, you start over. I've done that. So I had that already in my bank of experiences.
Mhm.
So I wasn't really looking for business as usual or starting my life, getting it to be just like it was. And the other thing that we all have to remember that kind of is already in the background is we went through COVID. And that was laying groundwork for, I mean, it wasn't a disaster, climate disaster, but it was a disaster.
Mhm.
For a year, I was alone in my apartment. And that was also unfathomable. The psychological repercussions from COVID. So I've had these big, huge chunks of time and experiences where I know what the bottom looks like. And with COVID, we didn't know, we don't remember. I think we all have selective amnesia. You block it out, right? Like for a long time, there was no vaccine. We didn't know how long that was going to last. But you can't escape a pandemic. But I could leave geographically.
Mhm.
So, so maybe that was already dialed in to how I was approaching this. And then I get to New York and I come down with sepsis and I end up in the hospital for a week.
Yeah.
And I couldn't really believe that was like that was also unfathomable that I've just escaped what I thought was I was gonna go someplace and be safe, and now my body was rebelling against me. So I had external and internal threats.
Mhm.
But a hospital when you're sick, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but like you feel safe in the hospital. They're taking really good care of you. I was really not very concerned about that outcome. And the care was wonderful. I was getting well, and I wasn't concerned about that. So I didn't need that. It was, because then it wasn't psychological. Then my body, then I started getting taken down
Mhm.
physically. And then I go home and, the roommate like is a nightmare and I have to leave. Um, the the resilience, I don't know where it comes from. I mean, at that point when I was in New York and I was living in the hotel for 2 weeks and I was homeless, that was bad. That I didn't really have resources because I was depleted.
Mhm.
So at that point, I just had to trust that, God, this is going to sound arrogant. I could make something happen.
Mhm.
I could rally my forces and I would find some place to go. And I didn't know what that was going to look like. I just had some sort of weird trust that I could survive. And I don't think there's an explanation for it other than I've had a really ridiculously hard life and I'm old now and I made it through it. So I called on all the resources and all the experiences I've had, and I've just been given opportunity. I had to look at it like as an opportunity to see what the next chapter was going to look like. I tell my clients, "Oh, there's a next chapter." Well, doctor, heal thyself. It's like I had to tell that to myself. There was a next chapter. There was going to be a next chapter because at that point, I was going to kill myself in Asheville. Then I almost died in New York, and it's like I don't want to die.
Yep.
So there was just a thing in my heart and in my head, and like ridiculous determination because I was going to fight this out. I was going to, I was winding myself up like I'm going to play this whole thing out now.
Yeah.
Like it's not going to eat me.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you might be staged at right here to shift from that recap of the kind of bumps, the hardships, and so on, to if you would share with us a little bit about what are some of the inner skills and capacities that you had to draw on in yourself. And it might be too early, but it's fine if you happen to be able to answer this one, is that as you're looking out from here now, or maybe as you're driving across the country to get to where you are now, what are some of the attributes of people you might hope to end up in community with? You've been planting the seeds in the past two chapters of this talk about if you could only live with kindred spirits, that would be heaven. And so, can you talk a little bit about what does the flame tell you about what are some of the attributes of people that you would love to be able to sit in circle with where you live, people you could trust and so on?
Yeah, and it's the dream, it's the vision. And I've had this before, like this was way before the hurricane, right? Because I'm climate aware, I'm collapse aware, I have known that the best way to survive what was coming was to find a group of people to live with, like a community, like a tribe. And so the vision that I have is number one, I want it to be outside of a city. I don't think being in a big city or even a medium-sized city is going to be a good thing. And then, having maybe off the grid potential and being someplace where there's water, like a river or a stream or something. But I think that the humans that I would like to be with, like the number one most important thing is everybody would have to be empathetic. They would have to be kind and they wouldn't be dismissive if somebody had a bad day or something, like most of society is right now. Everybody's just intolerant of anything that is annoying to them. Nobody wants to deal with this.
Yes.
So we have to be with people that have done their work. And then, then the people need to have like a gardener, a mechanic, somebody with psychological skills, and have the ability to think outside the box, like really innovative. So because when a disaster hits, you don't have the luxury of sitting around for a couple days and trying to, like, you have to go into action. So I want that. And I want them to all be totally collapse aware. I can't be with people anymore that just think everything's just going to be fine. That's magical thinking now. And it's not even healthy to do that anymore. So this is just my little vision. I don't really think it would be that complicated to put it together.
Mhm.
I actually think this might be pretty easy. I think I have to land somewhere first, but before I set this up. But I mean, what I figure is I could go somewhere and find a big old farmhouse somewhere and then start looking for the other humans. And that may sound really simplistic, but I mean, that's kind of where I would start with that.
Yeah. Let me just feed that back to you a little bit to make sure I'm hearing you. You didn't quite say it this way, but I'm wondering if this is fair to say that you're saying in terms of yourself, you got to have enough self-awareness to know something about how you operate, like what pisses you off about what kind of people, excuse me, in other words, what triggers you in a given situation. And then maybe, along a continuum of learning about ourselves, we could start to expand our capacity of who we can be around and how their point of view differs from our own and so on. uh, One thing we could do is become more and more self-aware, and that makes us less and less triggerable. Is that fair to say?
Sure. I mean, when I said, people have to do their work,
Exactly.
I just feel like there has to be a starting point when we talk to each other about maybe putting a community like this together. There's got to be, for lack of a better term, a mission statement, like a broad idea that everybody understands. Like the most important part is going to be cohesion and loving each other and caring about each other. I always say you need friends when you're having a bad day, not when you're having a good day.
Yeah.
And none of us are perfect, and all of us have personality idiosyncrasies. I mean, I don't think there's anything we can do about that. And it's also going to be like dating. Like you're just going to have to get to know people. You're just going to have to take a chance. I mean, I'm sure you've dated people you thought were okay, and a couple months into it, you were like, oh, they're psycho. I mean, I don't think that's avoidable. That's just human nature. But if everybody understands what the primary intention is, that might make things easier, you know. The being triggered and being pissed off, it's like that happens to humans, but if something that we expect is coming, if all of this work that we've done around climate change and collapse, if people honestly believe it and they're expecting it to happen, I think people are going to be a lot more tolerant and happy to be with like-minded people. I think that will override the pettiness of daily life.
Yeah.
If people can see the big picture about what we're doing together,
Mhm.
you know, and I would try and articulate that enough so that people would understand what my goal is, and see if I can drum up people who, you know, they might be smarter than me. I want people smarter than me. And and that understand that the way to survival now is going to be being with other people.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. And if I
Okay.
may, I'd like to just throw in what has become really a cornerstone for me of anyone that I run into, excuse me, anyone that I run into that has the intention of getting together with other people, some number of other people, whether it's a task or a project group, or it's a process group, meaning, you know, personal healing or trauma work or whatever, or if it's just day-to-day living for a family or a neighbor, you know, a couple of neighbors, at some point there's going to be an upset. You know, you and I will disagree about something at some point.
Yeah.
And the simplest possible approach that I've seen simplest possible meaning on terms that I am understanding in just my experience is that the first thing that if a person has the space for it, is to notice and to name, hey, there's an upset going on here. And as obvious as that is, you'd be amazed how seldom that gets named. Um, the next available moment is pause. Hey, we've got an upset going on here. Let's just pause for a moment. Let's take a breath. Literally just a pause. The third, and really this is I don't know, complicated. This is the more uh, substantial element in this really basic conflict resolution strategy. And that is to do what's called empathy circle listening, or it's also called reflective listening. It is the most basic listening exercise I'm aware of. I mean, other than just one person talks, the other one listens in silence, and that's it. That's not very fulfilling, though. There's no guarantee that if I'm speaking and you're just silently listening, there's no guarantee this is working. So this empathy circle listening is hey, there's an upset here. Pause. Let's just take a breath. Okay. So how this empathy circle listening works is one of us starts, and if I were to start, I speak for about a minute, between a minute and 2 minutes, to just lay out what I think is happening, what happened to get us upset. At the end of that minute and a half or so, you would reflect back to me what you heard. It doesn't have to be word for word and exact. It's really just the essence of what you heard me say. And then you pause And I get to say, yes, you got everything I said except for that last thing about what caused it. I didn't say it was your anger. I said I thought we were both angry. Do you get that? I'm making something up right now. I'm just making up an example of how we would just correct whatever little piece of the first sharing to a point where I could say, yeah, I feel heard. Allison, thank you so much. I feel heard. Then it would become your turn to you take about a minute and a half to speak about what you saw happening when we started to get upset. And then, of course, I would reflect back what I heard you say. So thanks so much I didn't mean to make this pause that long, but really that's all the instructions that people need. You could just play this piece back if you're watching this video and write down those basic instructions, and you've got a basic conflict resolution strategy that is better than 90% of this planet's population has available to it.
And, and maybe, there is going to be a huge psychological component to organizing a group to live together. And maybe you just include that when you're talking to people about them joining the group.
Absolutely.
Like right up front, like there has to be like a psychological profile about how it's all going to work too. Like, I don't think you just put an ad on Facebook and say, I'm renting a house, come live with me. I mean, this to me is it's more intentional.
Yes.
So what you're talking about absolutely has to be part of the understanding of how a community not would just function, but would survive and be successful. You want to be successful.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to look for people, like I said, that have experienced this sort of back and forth and trying to resolve problems,
Yep.
because you don't want to blow up the whole thing. You want this to run as smoothly as possible.
Yeah. What you're
So
what you're speaking about, Allison, is I would agree is also a cornerstone, also essential. And I would just say it slightly differently, and that is basically, and I'll probably get a lot of angry or conflicting comments or something on this video, but uh, there is there's little or no room for cancel culture, immediately dismissing someone from my life because they piss me off or we don't agree or whatever. There has to be, as you just got through saying, there has to be a commitment, a mutual commitment to giving some kind of space to both voices. Without that, it is guaranteed to fail and probably cause damage on its way down.
yeah, and that could happen. I
Yeah.
there's no perfect. It would be an experiment. The intentional communities that I've researched are basically money based. Like I've said this before, the you have to have enough money to join these communities. Money cannot be the mitigating factor in what I want. Because that's you can't eat money. You can't plant money and make it grow. I mean, my grandfather used to say, rich or poor, it's nice to have money. But it's it it has to be the cohesiveness of the group that wants to be together and be supportive and caring and loving and understand the basic need for human connection.
Yep.
And we have been so divided. We have been so conditioned to be alone and, be able to do everything by ourselves. And I don't see that going into the future. I just don't think that this is going to work. And I don't want to be caught with my pants down when there's a big collapse, like the government could collapse. It's not just, we're not talking about just climate. We're talking about the
Mhm.
financial realm could blow, the government could blow. I mean, this is what we talk about when we say polycrisis.
Mhm.
It's the convergence right now. Personally, I don't understand how anybody doesn't see this, but there's an author named Chris Hedges. Do you know who Chris Hedges is?
Oh yeah.
So he wrote a book a couple years ago called America, the Farewell Tour.
Mhm.
And the first chapter is bookends. He talks about why this happened, when it happened, and it was inevitable that like we were going to be at this point right now. So it's not like it was a secret to the academics. They could see this clearly. And so we're in this. And it would be great if people could get on board with this. And if we all pooled our resources, the money part would be easier. We wouldn't each need a washing machine. We wouldn't each need a vacuum cleaner. We wouldn't each need a refrigerator. Like everybody's buying, it's set up. This is end stage capitalism.
Mhm.
So if we all pool our resources, it might be really doable.
It might
It
be.
just, I mean, does that sound like I'm a Pollyanna? I don't know. I don't know.
You know, I want to just invite you um to keep this flame. This is part of, I believe that this is part of your flame, a flame of what's possibly out ahead, what it might be like to live with other people, with kindred spirits at some point in the near future, maybe in the Pacific Northwest, you never know. And yes, sure, it is a bit Pollyannish. I could go there, but I'm wary of going there because it it is one of the few things that we can still hold so preciously is, can we find other kindred spirits with whom we can start to build something else? That's what we're studying a book in our course called Islands of Sanity in the Mad World, in this living resilience thing that's behind this podcast. And the book that we're studying is At Work in the Ruins by Dugald Hine, who is one of the authors of the Dark Mountain Manifesto, one of the earliest substantial writings on collapse, human-caused collapse of both Earth and human systems. It's a brilliant thing, that Dark Manifesto. And Dugald Hine has come on to, after these 15 years, I believe now, is has written this book, At Work in the Ruins, and it is about exactly this. About creating community out of the ruins of our time. And so he's not mincing words about, yeah, we're in collapse. It's happening. And he doesn't know when it's going to be fully collapsed and what'll happen when. But very much like what I hear you saying, Allison, he is pointing to there's a particular orientation we can have for our attention and for our relationships, for our presence. It can be asking ourselves what's possible as we're moving forward to this inevitable downturn, very disruptive downturn or collapse. And how do we adjust our presence, our ability to relate with one another, our ability to communicate with one another, our sense of well-being, physical well-being, spiritual well-being, and so on. So, is there anything more on that thread that you can think of or suggest, especially for people who are brand new to this conversation?
Well, I would like to say that this isn't a new concept. There have been literary breadcrumbs for years now.
Mhm.
I don't know if writers get they're channeling information, but for an example, there's an author, her name is Starhawk. She's a witch, but she wrote The Fifth Sacred Thing. And The Fifth Sacred Thing is the story about after collapse. She never really goes into what collapse looked like. She doesn't address that. What the book is about is how people come together in community and rebuild a new world like living together harmoniously. This is not just my vision. I stole it. I stole it from all these fabulous writers, okay?
Yeah.
I'm a voluminous reader and I've been searching to put all these pieces together for years. So reading these books, it wasn't reality, but it resonated with me because I felt like it was going to happen. So these are not new concepts. And I certainly do not want to take credit for this. Um, there's another book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Mm.
He was a psychiatrist in the concentration camps in Germany, and his premise of his book was the people that survived the concentration camps had hope. They had something to look forward. There's something they wanted. And I mean that's as bad as it gets,
Yeah.
Again, me going through a hurricane wasn't a concentration camp.
Yeah.
So there's a poet from a beat poet from the 60s named Lawrence Ferlinghetti,
Mhm.
and he wrote a poem called I'm awaiting a rebirth of wonder. It's like you can still have hope in the face of what we're facing. And so it's a duality. Collapse is coming, but you can still put together a beautiful life with people that are caring and loving. And, you go out and you have some goats and you have some chickens and you have some dogs and cats, and it might be fine.
Yeah.
And I don't think it shouldn't be this hard, but my problem with it is the resistance. When I talk about it, everybody's eyes glaze over.
Mm.
Like nobody's ready to do this.
So I can feel the envelope of our time together in this third chapter starting to close, and I'm I'm still just loving your realness. Um, there's no hopium going on here, but there is a sweet, kind of a precious possibility that before I think we were calling the flame, that you keep bringing like, there's a possibility we can come together in small groups all over the place. And maybe some of them will be rural, and maybe some of them will scratch out living in the city environment, and some of them will have a particular set of values, like we only want to be farming our own food or whatever it is. They'll have their own particular way to focus
Right,
themselves.
right.
And yeah, I've also been hearing you kind of lean toward some of those inner skills that are required when any people get together over time for any reason. Because patience is going to wear thin. And sometimes I'm going to get on your nerves. And sometimes, yeah, we might even have an argument about something. So there's these inner skills, there's these interpersonal skills, there's these capacities for how much stress can I take in a day? And how well do I know my own system when I need to take a break? I really need to just take a break and go quiet my mind. Some of us don't have those skills yet.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Maybe not yet.
And
Or they don't know that those skills are even needed, or they
right.
don't know what it looks like because they've never been to therapy, or, or they're just living too fast to even slow down enough, and they're just sublimating all the stress because they have to go out in the world into the matrix and make money.
Yep.
So this would be one of the things in a group. Somebody would have to have the knowledge. There would have to be a person that had some information about how psychology works.
Yes.
Like, so it's not just the doing, the gardening and the mechanics. It's also the psychological mechanics of how to navigate life in the face of collapse.
Yeah. The language I like to use for that is, well, there's the clinical language that I don't like to use, which is self-regulation and co-regulation. And what that means, it's a clinical way of saying, if I'm knocked off center by life today, I have some amount of skill of bringing myself back to sense of center. And if we're co-regulating, you and I both are knocked off center by whatever it is. And we can work together, we can breathe together, we can sit in silence together, we can do whatever the practices are, that we both can bring ourselves back to center. So that's one simplest level skill set. I call that the first aid level of resilience skills. And I think you're also pointing at some of those kind of mid-level skills of where in the course of just doing what we do in this little family unit or this neighborhood unit or this small community unit, we come together and try and work out a kind of a sticky situation or a difficult problem or a difficult decision that we need to make together. And there can be upset. There can be antagonistic opinions or points of view. And some things got to expand in ourselves if we're going to be successful at doing that kind of simple community relations, especially when we're in an environment in which the temperature is rising, the stress level just keeps on growing.
Well, right. And
Yeah.
everybody's going to have a different reaction
Mm.
based on their life experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you don't know what that's going to look like until you're in it. And it could be really jarring for other people. Like everybody's not going to react the same way.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a lot of unknowns
Yeah.
in this psychological navigating that we might be facing.
Yeah.
And I don't, it may not work. It might blow up because it's too intense. I don't know,
Mhm.
but I'd rather face this with other people than go through this by myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Allison, it has been so um, educational for me, informative. It's also been so inspiring that I've mentioned a number of times now that just how well you articulate your inner reality for us to understand and to be able to follow you in your story and your recounting. And it takes courage and it takes humility for any of us to share at the level you share. And I just really want to thank you for that. And I'm curious if I could just open up one last opportunity for you to wrap this up in a good way. Is there anything you'd like to say, is particularly to young people as they start to encounter whatever the signs and symptoms of in their family or their neighborhood or their school or their community, that things are starting to rattle loose. There's starting to get more stressful.
Yeah, I can address that pretty easily because Americans have been brainwashed into thinking that we should just follow the news media, believe what they say. So my approach is the opposite. Like, do your own research. But the number one thing would be to trust your intuition. If something doesn't seem right to you, it's so important to honor that in yourself.
Mhm.
That would be my number one thing. Do your own research. Don't believe everything you're told, right? Part of the response I've gotten about the hurricane, a lot of people I've talked to have told me they think the government caused the hurricane. Okay, it's ridiculous. So if you hear something like that and it doesn't ring true, then I would tell all young people, like, join a group, talk to other humans, find people that you can relate to, and they need to be heard. You don't have to sit in your room alone and think that you're crazy because you have these thoughts. If
Mhm.
you really see something out in the world, trust what you get. For example, if Mother Nature isn't behaving the way it used to behave for, like a couple years ago in Asheville in July, the leaves started turning yellow and falling off the trees. That's absolutely unheard of. And I would ask everybody I knew, like, isn't this weird? No, it's normal. It's I lived there 25 years. It wasn't normal. Leaves started changing at the end of September. So for young people, empower yourself.
Mhm.
Believe in yourself. The government, the powers that be, they don't want you to think for yourself. And this isn't a big ask. You're entitled to believe what you believe and what you see, not what you're being told, but what you're actually experiencing. And I think that's really, you know, critical for the young people are going to save the planet. They're the ones that are going to bring forward whatever healing that we're going to get. they're going to go to school. They're going to learn about the environment. So, and the other thing is always have a plan B. Trust yourself, trust your friends. Um, you don't have to believe the current situation is what they're telling you. And so excavate your deep inner landscape. Like ask yourself, who am I? What do I believe? What do I believe? And these are kind of easy questions. They're just not taught in school.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you get that information out there. I mean, that's hard right now.
Yeah. Yeah. We are truly in an existentially threatening time in human history, and engaging, you and I and so many others around the world are engaging in the most difficult conversation in human history. And one last time, Allison, I just so thank you for putting this conversation within reach for so many of us. We can relate to living in a, small to medium-sized town and having something completely unexpected happen, like happened here in Ashland 4 or 5 years ago in our firestorm,
Right.
and how to convey information and experience in a way that could help others who don't have a clue what to do, how to do it, how to connect with others, and so on. Yeah.
Well,
So,
I
yeah,
appreciate you. I appreciate you letting me, tell the story and just get the information out there.
yeah, you're sure welcome. I'm assuming that you'll be a regular from here out for any number of topics. And thank you again for your participation in a number of our online support groups or special focus groups here in Living Resilience. It's only through this kind of radical responsibility of a person sitting in a circle and holding space for others that this work happens. So it's great to have you in this little enclave here on the interwebs. And Allison, thank you again for your very real sharing with us about your travels and trials and tribulations, and now what's out on the horizon.
Well, thanks, Dean. Merry Christmas. Have a lovely rest of your evening.
All righty. Thank you so much.
And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell.